All right. Well, super excited to have our guest today, Dr. Daniel Shin. Dr. Shin is a practicing urologic surgeon. He's also a really experienced investor, in particular in real estate. That's kind of one of the awesome ways you can dive into his content. And, really where I find Daniel's just niche in investing kind of comes to the forefront. He's also an educator, and that will probably be apparent as you listen to him today in the show. So his goal, he started, the Darwinian doctor. For those of you that don't know about it, we're going to hear more about that in a second. But he really likes to help accelerate people's financial journey and really ended up doing that on his own through getting rid of $300,000 in debt, working through burnout, and, felt handcuffed in his job and now is on the other side of those things. And he did a lot of that through financial literacy, through financial education, and through creating financial independence for him and his family. And so I'm excited to dive into this because Daniel's not only successful in the financial realm, but he's also a prior client of the Alpha coaching experience. And so I'm really excited to jump into this today because Daniel can really tie in the three things that we really focus on the most on this podcast, which are your mindset, your money, and your time. And so we're really going to talk about it all and lay it all out there. So Daniel, welcome to the show.
Jimmy, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, just walk us through, a little bit of the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, who are you, where are you from, that sort of thing.
Sure, absolutely. So, as you said, I'm a urologic surgeon. I practice in Southern California. And I guess now I've been practicing for between 5 or 6 years as an attending surgeon. And I originally hail from the East Coast, though. And I like to, when people kind of ask me about my origin, I like to say that I'm from the suburbs of New Jersey. That's basically where I spent sort of my formative years. And, it was a very idyllic childhood in the beginning. I was at home with my mom, and my dad sort of worked in Manhattan and did the commute, and things were, fantastic. It was a very sort of picture perfect suburban existence. And,
Mm.
where things really, I think, started changing was around middle school, where there was a recession in the US. My dad's sort of industry, which was commercial real estate, really took a hit. And essentially all this, sort of perfect lifestyle that we were enjoying sort of went out the window over the course of a very short amount of time. And, as a child, it was very kind of disorienting. But to put it in perspective, one week things were fine, but then we started getting these threatening phone calls. And then very quickly, over the course of a weekend, we essentially had our house foreclosed and, had to move across town to a rental. And you can imagine, as a child, not really understanding much about money, this was really scary.
Yeah.
And this sort of financial scarcity and insecurity, I would say, marked the rest of my sort of primary education through middle school and high school, and affected a lot of my decisions later on. So basically, things were quite tight, financially in middle school and high school, and then that really led to a lot of the decisions and a lot of the ways that I look at money now, I think.
Yeah. That's really interesting, right? Because I know we're going to talk about it on the show, but just tying that in there that, your dad had this commercial real estate kind of business, and then you ended up going through some hard financial times. And now, real estate's one of your big deals. And so I just find that really interesting. You came from this scarcity mindset when it comes to money. And part of that in your background had to do with real estate. And now you use real estate to kind of solve the problem. So what's the deal there?
Yeah, I've thought about it a couple of times in sort of an ironic way. I haven't really dwelled on it much, but I think the thing is that my dad, it was real estate sort of on the broker side. So he didn't own assets himself. He was involved in the transactional quality of it. And then, so when that industry suffered, he had no, as far as I can tell, he had no other sort of streams of income, basically. So
Uh-huh.
one of the ways that I've insulated against that is by having sort of multiple ways to make money, of course, as a physician, and
Mhm.
then also through sort of real estate on the ownership side, through, passive income in that manner.
Yeah, yeah, that makes more sense. And so you went on this journey yourself, and at some point you decided to take the step into making a blog, The Darwinian Doctor. And it's been pretty cool to follow your journey. And you obviously share a lot of similarities in terms of stepping into the physician blogging space, and then some anonymity being there, and then eventually deciding not to be. And so, why did you start The Darwinian Doctor? And what's the purpose there?
Yeah. So basically, what happened is that I saw becoming a physician as my means to a stable financial future, and I think you know, by many measures, that is absolutely what has happened. I got great grades, and then I got into a great college. I went to medical school. I got into a competitive, specialty with urologic surgery, and
Hmm.
um, but basically, what happened is that I became an attending physician, and uh, all of my dreams, right, were realized. I had a great job. I had a family. I was having kids. Everything was going great, and I was doing everything that you were supposed to do. I got a new car. It was this fancy red SUV, and moved into a big house. And then, but like 2 or 3 years into it, I was working 60 hours a week. And I live in Los Angeles, but I work down south about an hour from where I live. So I had,
Hmm.
2 hours of driving on top of that. And I was feeling really burnt out, and I would have loved to have cut back, but my lifestyle had sort of expanded to a point where I felt very shackled by my expenses. We got the mortgage, we got the car payment, we got daycare costs for both kids because my wife works as well. So I felt like I had these very heavy golden handcuffs, as I like to call them, as
Hmm.
other people do as well. And then I was looking for solutions. So that led me, to podcasts. I was listening to a lot of podcasts about personal finance and financial independence on my drives. Um, and, that basically became my new goal,
Hmm.
to gain control over my finances. And I started the Darwinian Doctor basically to record my journey and hopefully inspire other people to do the same.
Yeah, yeah, and it's been really fun to watch that transition happen and to see you help other people and you've got a lot of transparency on your site that I really appreciate because some people, in fact, I was recording an interview yesterday and somebody was saying, hey, I really love Jimmy how transparent you are and you really kind of share your struggles and I feel like that helps destigmatize things and then immediately followed that comment up with like, but I'm not ready to do that, And so like I really do like it when people that put themselves out there in the public space are willing to be transparent, and I've always found you to be that way. So kudos to you. It takes some bravery.
Yeah, that was an interesting transition because actually the first 2 years of my blog, I was anonymous. And I use that anonymity to actually overshare a lot of my personal sort of budget and finances, expenses and spending and debt.
Hmm.
And I think that really does provide a lot of context to what I'm writing. I think it allowed me to have the comfort to share very specific details about that. But then after a couple of years, I felt like that anonymity was creating a little bit of a wall between myself and my readers.
Hmm.
So I decided to just put it all out there. So in January 2021, I said, okay, this is who I am. This is my name. I put my face up there. And since then, I think it's actually been really rewarding. And that doing it in that order, I think allowed me to start the blog with sort of a level of transparency that would have been tough if I had had my name on there from the beginning. So I think it's worked out.
Yeah, no, and we share a lot of similarities in that way. I had the same experience. And one other similarity that I hear kind of coming through in the background of what you're talking about is I figured out the financial stuff first as well. And, put my family on a glide path to be financially independent in our mid 40s. And yet I was still burned out in medicine. And so I hear you kind of saying, hey, I found this financial piece. I was listening to the podcast, I was learning about all this other stuff, and yet you were still burned out. And so I would love to hear your take on the mindset piece of things. You ended up diving into coaching yourself, and I'm sure, like all of us, when you first started, you were a skeptic. But why did you find that was important, and why do you think that money by itself didn't solve that problem?
So yeah, I think it's definitely been an evolution. And I think it really came from the fact that as I've learned more about personal finance and real estate investing, and I've met so many amazing people along the way. And I often ask myself, what differentiates people, successful people who on paper look very, very similar to people that are maybe have the same financial means and the same, resources, but are not happy or are not as successful as they want to be.
Right.
And I realized that a lot of that is mindset, the way that you perceive the world, the way that you perceive your place in the world and how you relate to others. And there's a lot of, I think, cheerleading in real estate investing, especially,
That's true.
but behind that, I think there is a little bit of truth to the fact that some people are successful because they will themselves to be successful, and they've sort of learned to, you know, essentially filter their thoughts in a way that makes them successful. So along the way, I was over the first 2 years, I think, gaining more and more control of my personal finance. And I'd gotten to a point where on paper, I was quite successful, but you're absolutely right. I was still very burnt out at work. I was overextended and I felt very roadblocked still. Like I needed something to help me to make that leap, to regain a little bit more of my sort of freedom and time. And that's what I felt that coaching would help me with.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I completely agree. And it's fascinating to watch people, go through that journey and how all of these tools, they're super important. And that's why, like, you're not going to hear people like you and people like me not talk about money anymore, because money is still a really important tool, right? But it's, a means to an end. It's not the end itself. And we all start to recognize eventually that money ends up being a surrogate for our time. And so it's been really interesting watching you take that transition and then using that mindset piece to get, honestly, you can get even better at the financial aspect of things and become an even better real estate investor. I don't invest in real estate, heavily myself. And so, but I hear it all the time, and you're exactly right. That's a really good way to think about it. How to differentiate the people that you see as being successful. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way, but you're right. That's a interesting thing. So if you were, working with somebody, you had a colleague and they were like, hey, I'm thinking about, coaching and considering whether it's right for me. Like, what do you think the biggest takeaway for you was when it came to coaching?
I think that the biggest takeaway was that um, there is a difference between basically thoughts and circumstances. And, this was, these are terms that you'll hear in coaching. And, when you initially learn about these terms, it's like, it seems very almost so rudimentary that it's like, of course, that makes sense. But then to actually learn how to apply that to your life is a different thing entirely. And I think it's almost like a superpower. So basically, it took me about a month and a half to 2 months of hearing about it before it really started to sink in. But there are things that happen in your life that are facts. You stub your toe. Okay, I stubbed my toe. That's a fact. But the way that you then, think about these things that are facts in your life is completely under your control. Your thoughts and the way that you perceive what's going on in your life is very much under your control. So, it took me a while to discuss this and read about it and for it to sink in. But after a while, I realized that I'm actually in control of a lot more in my life than I initially realized. And that was very freeing. That was what the big sort of aha moment from coaching for me.
Yeah. And how important is that, when you are burned out in medicine and you feel like you have no control? Cause that's where that's where I came in. That's where almost all of our clients come in, right? Like they feel like, hey, this is a systemic problem. I've got no control over it. And by the end, they're like, actually, I feel like I control a lot of this. I agree. It's a big takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a work in progress. The course that I did with ACE was 3 months. And since then I've still been digesting it all. But it's definitely sort of a practice that you don't sort of flip a switch and all of a sudden you're fine and you're completely in control of everything. It's something that I'm still practicing. But I would say that spending the 3 months. Listening to the coaches, doing the one-on-ones, especially, it really did sort of start me on this path where I do feel a lot more control. And I realized that a lot of the fears that I had about, trying to exert more control over my schedule as a physician, a lot of those fears were just in my head.
Yeah.
I'm in a leadership position at work. And one of the biggest fears I had was that if I try to cut back from 120% or 125%, which was my usual week, to closer to 100%, that I would be letting my department down, or we wouldn't be able to sort of meet our metrics and all that. And then I realized that, that is just not true. We are going to be just fine. In fact, by exerting control over my life and being less burnt out and more healthy, that I think it'll be inspirational to my department, So choosing to perceive the situation in that way, I think, was not possible without working it out in, the coaching sessions.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I tell people, the podcast, like this is great. Podcasts are amazing, and you're going to learn a lot of the what on a podcast, right? So we could talk about what to do, but then when it comes to how to apply it to your specific situation, that's where that one-on-one coaching that you're talking about comes into play. Because like, hey, there's this concept, fantastic, but how do we apply it to your position as a leader in your department and this narrative you have about, letting your department down and how that's showing up, and then walking you back through that and saying, hey, is this really how you want it to go? And so, that I think that's a really great example of the how of coaching, which is applied to everybody's individual situation. And so, speaking of that, there is this, kind of stigma involved in coaching. And so I'm kind of curious. I get asked this question a lot. So from your side of things, as someone who's gone through coaching as a client, what would you say about coaching and the stigma that may exist in terms of people asking for help? And what would you have to say about that?
I think that you just have to decide what's best for yourself. Are you going to let society or some stigma that might exist basically prevent you from making a transformation in your life? I think that I didn't see as much of a stigma because I've been sort of exposed to, a lot of my friends in investing. And I think a lot of my friends who are making really incredible differences in society and their own lives, they are coaches or have coaches. So I think for me, I being in these circles, I'm like, there's got to be something here, because these people who I see as really amazing people are either coaches themselves, have gone coaching, undergone coaching programs, or I saw the benefit, so I think that, maybe there's a stigma to both coaching, and in certain ways it's parallel to mental health services, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I see the benefit that all of these services bring in people's lives. So I would say get over it. It's 2022. It's time to move forward.
Yeah, and I think you're making a great point, right? Because a lot of people have this assumption that when you're getting coached or you're seeking help, you're asking for help, that you look weak, or that you have like some problem that you need to have fixed. And really it's interesting because I remember talking to Kenji and Leite one time, and they were basically pointing out like, hey, like, isn't coaching more than like just for people that are burned out? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like coaching, fundamentally, I still get coached. I'm not burned out anymore. And it helps you go from good to great as well. So like, wherever you are in that spectrum, I totally agree with you that the people that I've met that have a growth mindset, that have an abundance mindset, that are accomplishing massive things in their life, all have coaches. And all of the best coaches that I know have coaches themselves. And so it's not like this process, just stops. But I think that's really key. You to pick up on that. And so, in the live training that's going to happen right before you and I record this, or before this goes live, we talk about a few different boundaries that people have in terms of their mindset and their money. But one of the other ones that we talk about, the third boundary, is time. And I know that you have stepped back from, clinical medicine a little bit, going from, 1.2 or 1.25 FTE, or, whatever you were doing before. And so to walk us through that journey. How'd you make that decision? And I know you talked a little bit about this, but I'd love to know how you feel about the control of your time now and how that's actually concretely shown up in your life after what you've gone through.
Sure. And this is only 2 months old, right? So it was only we in my department schedule things out 3 months in advance. So a lot of physician schedules are like that. You have appointments and you got to fill it in advance. So, but in December, I just went to my scheduler and I said, look, in December, I would like to, as much as possible, given the responsibilities I have and, taking care of the patients, I want to be as close to 100% time as possible. So 40 hours a week, right? And just talking about it in this way is so funny because that is normal for,
Yeah.
99% of society, right? Having a 40-hour week, I think in a lot of ways, society has said, okay, that's the sort of time allocation that is right to give to work. And, it still gives you time to take care of your family and stay healthy. I don't even know if that's true or not, but that's sort of the standard. But as physicians, we often struggle with that, right? And I think it's very tough. But in December, I started trying to do that, and essentially it's just sort of a math game. So we've arranged my schedule to sort of match up in a way that I concentrate my hours into hopefully 4 days of the week. And then I have one day a week where I can work on my blog, I can work on my real estate business, I can sort of work on educational stuff like on TikTok, and um, and that actually I think is working to a certain extent. It's been really challenging, I would say, over the last couple of weeks, because we've had about 25% of our department out due to COVID. So
Yeah.
I've been covering a lot, and covering shifts and covering call, but that is a goal. And as soon as that started happening, my mental health took a significant step forward. I was so much less burnt out. And the problem is, when you're trying to, I love the effect, the financial security that I get from getting passive streams of income from stocks, from real estate investing. And it's also, I think, really rewarding, having these other creative outlets like the blog. But to have the time for it, there's only so much you can do to optimize your schedule before you're just burning the midnight oil. And I still do that to a certain extent, but gaining a bit of control over that time has been really, really rewarding.
Yeah. I think you're kind of hinting at it, but I know in my own journey, I definitely traded physician burnout for entrepreneur burnout. And, the transition between those two periods where I was kind of burning the candle at both ends, that midnight oil that you're speaking of is definitely, I think, a lot of, something that a lot of people can relate to when they start creating non-clinical streams of income, because it is work. Like, everybody, we love these passive income streams, but like none of them are passive to set up. So like, it can be an interesting thing, but you're talking about work-life balance. And so when it comes to that really is the time where, money starts to play that pivotal role and having those income streams. And so you've talked about it a little bit, but is it, how do you view money now, your financial independence, those passive income streams, in terms of the work-life balance that you have? Like, do you feel like it came from there, or do you feel like you have a better understanding now, and then the money just happens to be a part of that? Like, how do those two things relate, your work-life balance and those income streams, the financial independence you've created?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky subject still, because I still have a lot of scarcity mindset that I think I'm struggling through because of my childhood. So I really struggled to cut back clinically until I had passive streams of income sort of already set up. So right now in my real estate portfolio, we've got 25 units that most of them are producing passive income at this point. And that, when I looked at the income coming in from that, and then what I was going to be giving up clinically, I was like, okay, I can kind of make that shift. Still, I'm sacrificing more money by going from 120% to 100%. But actually, in coaching, it was actually Junaid, one of the coaches, that he pointed out, look, you're not giving up as much as you think you are, because you're in the highest tax bracket. California taxes you like crazy. So that actually was one of the most pivotal moments for me. I was like, you are absolutely right. So in making these calculations and thinking about what am I giving up, it allowed me to think about what I'm gaining, more than just the numbers.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that a little bit more, right? Because actually, this just happened today. I had somebody make a comment on one of the posts about the cost of physician coaching, and how they felt like, hey, this really costs a lot of money, and I can't justify spending that. And I always find this really interesting, particularly for people like you and me, who we spend quite a lot of time reading and writing and podcasting and blogging about money. And so, how did you justify spending $5,000 or $6,000 to get coaching, as someone who is a money nerd? You live in this space.
Yeah, so I struggled with it, honestly,
Yeah.
because in a lot of ways in my own personal life, I have trouble investing in myself. I literally invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into real estate, at the drop of a hat. I've run the
Mhm.
numbers. I'm like, this makes sense. Okay. And then I make the investment, right? But when it comes to things like signing up for a coaching program, or literally buying myself a new shirt, I'm like, I don't need that. I can get by without it. And I struggle with that a lot. And I'm still getting used to the, idea of spending money to work on myself. But the thing that I think helped me make that investment was that, as physicians, we're some of the most highly educated people in the world, right? Through medical school, college, residency. And we will go into debt to the tune of $300,000, thinking that there's going to be a benefit. And then I think it's just getting to a point where you believe that the coaching is worth the money. And I think hearing from testimonials from prior students and then just seeing it around me, I can tell that it was absolutely worth the money. So putting out that initial investment of a few $1,000s, I think is going to just change the rest of my life, and
Yeah.
I don't think that's hyperbole to say that. So, basically I got to that point and I said, look, I can spare the money and I think that it's going to be worth it. And it was.
Yeah. And I love the way that you're framing that too, right? Because you're talking about real estate and putting in lots of money to invest in something that is going to provide value because you can measure it. And then when you change your mindset to view this as, hey, this is an investment in myself, in my brain, right? And in my life, and that the value that I'm going to get out of that is worth the cost, right? So you basically did a ROI calculation on the benefits for your life that you would get from coaching, just like you would for a real estate investment. And so and that's exactly what I did too. Cause like, it's not like I didn't have to, overcome that same hurdle when I stepped into coaching, and I still pay for coaching. And so that's the way that I think about it as well. Yeah. I think that's the best way to think about it. What value am I getting? And if you're not getting value, then don't do it. Right. But if you are going to get a value out of it, fantastic. And so I think everybody's got to sort through that themselves. And I always find it really interesting to hear like how people got over that hurdle, when it exists. So Daniel, if people are looking to learn more about you or the Darwinian Doctor and your mission there, where can people find you? How can they link up with you?
I think probably the easiest way is the blog, the darwiniandoctor.com. It has sort of links to everything that's going on with me. You can, if you are into seeing myself, into seeing sort of educational yet very funny, videos on TikTok, you can get to it from there. You can get to my Instagram. You can get to my, other socials and things like that. So I think that's the best way.
Yeah. So if you haven't checked out Daniel's awesome TikTok channel, please make your way over there. And hey, Daniel, really appreciate you hanging out today. Super fun talking with you and everything that's going on in your life.
Yeah, this was great, Jimmy. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely.